Hello, everyone. We are so excited to have you here. New Polities Podcast for the second season of the Politics of Gender here with our guest, me and Maria Brandell. We are really excited because today we're discussing how unexciting everything is. And I think there's nothing more thrilling and cathartic than talking about the lack of thrills and catharsis in this here world we got going on.
I remember I was reading this book and I came across a sentence that the whole world now tastes like rice crackers. And I got so excited because it's true.
It is true. You know, Walker Percy said the goal of the Catholic novelist, and really any novelist, is that moment where you step back from the book and you say, yeah, that's how it is. And that's how it is. It is a beige world. I think about this every time I see a subway. I think about this every time I walk from a parking lot into a major retail store and back again and drive back to my home box, having visited my shop boxes. And I watch all the ads. I just watched the Super Bowl, and they assure me, all these ads, that the world is magical and exciting, and if we eat the right things and drink the right beers, the almost ecstatic thrill of life
in Technicolor
will bloom and blossom within us. And then
I think the one I remember, well, one of them was like a cereal commercial, and they were all celebrating the cereal, but each cereal box had a different color, and so there's like different groups of people that were celebrating it. It was like glitter fell from the sky. It made it really exciting.
You know, but I've noticed this with advertising is it's become self-aware. Well, it probably has been for a while, but I notice advertising every time the Super Bowl comes around, which is where I get my input of the culture. And it's become self-aware that the world has very little to offer in terms of joy. And so it's similar in its exuberance, you know, glitter falling out of the sky, people flying dragons, but everyone is ironic, everyone is detached, everyone kind of knows, they've got like a knowing smile on their face. And the dominant humor of the entire thing is very similar to the dominant humor of like Marvel, the Marvel universe, which is like awkward speaking. Like, did you, what? You're here? No. And I think what this shows is that the world really is beige and we're just trying to push our way through it regardless.
Or just, just be ironic about it and make it funny.
Yes.
That it's beige.
Yes. Irony is the great self-defense mechanism of the human organism.
Right. But I think kind of why we're launching into the beige world is that something you hear a lot from the right is the kids are just bored these days, and that's why they're doing this transgender thing. And there is something to it, but it's not just that, like, the kids aren't working. They just need a job. And if they only had a job, they wouldn't be doing this gender stuff.
Yes.
And I think it's just a lot more obvious, I think, for the younger generation that there's more going on than just pure boredom. Yeah,
absolutely. And so I think to get up to that point, we're just going to briefly recall our current situation, which in Western cultures, the cultures that are currently producing transgenderism and also just LGBTQ philosophies and theories and lifestyles, is the same culture that you could describe as the consumptive half of a global economy. So just briefly, and if you want to go through this in a little more detail, you can check out our episode 2 on capitalism. Right. But the basic way we got here is that coming out of the feudal era and into the Industrial Revolution, you have the destruction of subsistence forms of life, which were the major ways that we lived, and the beginning of wage labor, in which human survival is basically procured by selling your own labor for money and then using your money to get commodities.
Right. So instead of the household being the thing that produces the wealth, and the reason why you want other wealth is so that your household can end up producing more wealth. Now, the world has shifted where like all work is paid by a wage, and that just wasn't the case before. And then you are no longer the ones producing things in your household, but you're just buying the things that other people produced. And it took a long while to get to the point where we are today, which is, I mean, there's really nothing in our houses that are made by us.
Yeah, it's mostly made in China, which we'll talk a little more about. But
I made pot holders as a kid.
Nice.
That was
an ashtray. Nobody smokes in the house. But, so commodities take on this exalted life because they become the means by which we procured our survival. So instead of working the land, instead of direct relationships with people both over us and below us, we now procure our lives through the purchase of commodities. So wage labor becomes extremely important. Mm-hmm. And this leads to ultimately a very concrete idea of man and woman that kind of takes its final form, maybe not final, but definitely a most articulate form in the 1950s, in which the male and any kind of identity that we can really establish with male is the one who accrues the wage
right,
and to purchase the commodities, and then the woman becomes the one who updates the commodities within the home, which becomes a space for warming up commodities, separating commodities, and basically making commodities useful for life. Mm-hmm. And that this is a highly untraditional mode of living, but it becomes, just through the power of its own repetition and the fact that it really is necessary to get a wage, to buy commodities in order to live,
right.
It takes on the whole force of nature. We really feel like, well, that's what a woman is. A woman is someone who basically consumes within the home and hopefully opens up that consumption for others too.
Yeah, I think Ivan Illich points out it's really the first time that you see like the homemaker or the housewife as a concept. So like what the man does is get the wage, he's the worker.
Yeah.
And then the woman, even though she's doing work, isn't seen as a worker, but as the homemaker because she's just receiving the commodities and updating it, which again, like I think it's helpful to go back and try to reimagine what things would have been. Like both men and women on average would be like generating wealth for their household, but most people weren't paid a wage.
No, they were producing things. So whether you were spinning, I think, did we already mention this? Am I doing this again? The spinster? Did I already do this? So you're an old spinster. Nobody wants to be an old spinster, but it's a term that comes from spinning. So actually having a productive activity within the home, which was for women, it was a compliment if you were a spinster because it meant you were doing something useful. But then as life becomes simply one that's attained by the purchase of commodities, now the person spinning, it's like, what are you doing? What are you doing up in that room spinning? What's the point? We need money to buy yarn. So like there's no productive economy. It's not like you have sheep in the backyard that you're actually shearing. But okay.
But I think the point of that to kind of set us in the right spot for today, and what we talked about in that episode is that when you have a shift in the way that labor and work is both seen and done,
yes.
And since men and women are the ones doing those roles, it's going to change your imagination of how you understand your own gender.
Totally.
And so, like, I mean, I think it's easiest to look at it from the women's perspective because the change was the most drastic.
Yeah.
I mean, like men and women are dependent on each other.
Yeah.
But there's a whole new way of conceiving yourself as being dependent on men when you can't go out and earn a wage, whereas that kind of imagination wasn't the same. I mean, you still depended on men,
yes,
but
you depended on them kind of in the way that two people dancing depend on each other. It's not that one is just the unproductive part of the equation. It's that both are necessary for the thing to tick.
Yeah, and it kind of makes sense why like women more and more were put into the women and child category, not just because the women were taking care of the children, but you kind of see this shift in women really being treated as children and being infantilized.
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. This is what Ivan Illich says, that having a wife within this sort of relationship where people were kept off of the land and out of productive property became more and more like a way of threatening a worker by basically saying, oh yeah, you will work for us because you're going to have to take care of this unproductive piece of property called Jessica, or your wife, I mean, whoever she is. But that is not actually where we're at now. And I think that even in our enthusiasm here, you can imagine that the critique simply stops there. And Catholic thought often does this, and I think it's actually one of the very noble things about it, that it's like concerned about the factories and the factory workers, and it's like, bro, where are the factories? What are you talking about? Or it's like, yeah, Catholic social teaching is all about putting power into the hands of workers and distributing property, and it's like, I don't, no one's working. What are you talking about? Why? Okay, well, because basically that privileged position of the housewife, of the woman within the relationship of wage labor, became everybody's relationship. We are all female now in this way. We are all women, because consumption has become the dominant reason for our economies and the dominant motivating, driving force behind them. One way to look at this is just, we mentioned this at the end of the last podcast, is just to look at what work means, like really what labor means philosophically. And John Paul II is wonderful on this in his encyclical Laborums Exercens. You cannot understand gender without reading this encyclical, I think. But one of the things he says is that labor really is the way that man's creativity shapes the given creation, and it's the way that man objectifies himself in creation. He sees himself. He sees the presence of himself. And women also, they see their presence in creation. They might be working with different objects, but the reason that work itself has this fundamental relationship to gender, I think, is because it's sort of a mirror. We don't actually learn a lot just by looking at ourselves in mirrors and in pictures, but we do learn a lot at looking at our work and the objects of our work. And what our society has turned to is an increasing number of jobs and roles for both men and women who are now sharing these in a very sexless, neutral way. Yeah. Sharing these jobs and roles that do not produce any real things, that are often part of large bureaucratic structures where the value of your work is not particularly clear. You're doing some one thing, you have some one spreadsheet, you're analyzing this sort of data, but there is nothing you can really point to as bearing your mark.
Right.
It's crappy jobs.
Yeah, I think a lot of us are involved in projects that never end.
Mm-hmm.
I have a friend who's going off to cooking school, and one of the reasons why she's so excited about it is because like she'll have a product at the end, like at a certain point, like the recipe will be completed, and whether it's good or bad, it's done.
Yeah.
But a lot of us are in jobs where there is no finished tangible project. I've completed this thing. So the nature of our work has kind of been shifting.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard enough to know what it is and what it means to be a man or be a woman, but when you take away the work whereby we reflect our self and our creativity back to ourself, it becomes all the more difficult. The reason why we're in this particular world, I don't want to belabor it because I would like to talk more about why it's such a boring world than just where it came from. But we have found that consumption is really just as important as production for the survival and continuity of the global economy that we have built. Now, this is obvious just on the face of it. It's like one of the things that I don't think many people know, but one of the reasons that we have this great tendency towards mass production in the Industrial Revolution is actually because the cost of machinery was so immense that the early industrialists began their work in a massive amount of debt for the cost of the machines. So it wasn't like you could just say, hey, I'm going to build, I don't know, some windmills here because I think these guys need windmills and it could be a profitable opportunity for myself. It's more like saying, okay, I have to make 2 million, like numbers that had not even existed before within England especially, except for like maybe large wars and state projects like that. All of a sudden, you have to produce and have your product become something that everyone wants and everyone needs in order to pay the very cost of the machinery that it took to get there. industrialism begins in this way with a tendency towards mass production, but it continues because the only way for all of the for the work to remain, for there to still be work for people, for the machines to keep running, for the factories, is you need demand. And so what characterizes our age is actually the stimulation of new needs and the sort of aggressive milking of new demands in order to create more production. And I think what's really important is to realize that this is sort of a death trap, where if we do not have the right amount of consumption, it's not just like we can say, oh, well, I guess we're just not consuming much. Maybe we'll make some other stuff, or just like take it back down to another level where we're making less, because that's not working. If we do not have the requisite amount of consumption, then our economy collapses and we have wars and famines.
Right.
That's the situation we locked ourselves into, because our work, I mean, just think about it. It's actually very logical. You don't need to like read Marx for this. It's like, okay, if we all survive by getting money, by working at these large industrial and corporate jobs for a wage to buy commodities, and now these, because everyone stopped buying stuff, these things are no longer efficacious. Well, guess what? You don't have a job, which guess what? You can't buy the commodity, which guess what? Commodities were made dependent for life. You're dependent on commodities for life because you don't have land and you don't have skill and you don't have any means of subsistence.
Right.
Therefore, if we do not buy, we die.
Yeah, it's kind of wild to think about if everyone just decided to start acting virtuously. It's like, you know what? I'm not going to buy more than what I really need, or like, you know, to live well, that our economy would just collapse.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's just wild that we've built a system that depends on us being greedy, like depends on vice in order for us to keep running.
Yeah. And what we've done is we have basically separated out those two factors, production and consumption. For a while, they were very mixed up within particular societies. So it was like you had, even in our society, it'd be like we owned the factories, and then we also owned the ad companies. Mm-hmm. The ad companies would work really hard to propagandize women and say, you need to have full lips. Now, before, fullness of lip was not precisely an object of desire. But now you need to have full lips, and we've just mass-produced the item by which you can achieve it. And this was all within one nation. This is all happening within America. Mm-hmm. But then what happens is we find it's cheaper, it's more effective for various reasons to make production to largely be the work of other nations, particularly in what's called the Third World. And for us to remain an intense sort of white-hot center of consumption. So we have the wild phenomenon, in some ways, of laborers in China, Sri Lanka, in South America, producing for low wages items that they're never going to buy, like Adidas shoes or something, for consumption in our country. And so our consumption is not, it's just important, like that is the basic role we play now as workers. It's not our work, it's our consumption. We do work a little and at things that are largely, meaningless for the sake of being able to consume. So we have an important role to play in the global economy as consumers.
So what you're saying is not, because people are working and spending like long hours in jobs, but what you're getting at is that our role in the global economy is to be the consumers, and it kind of it makes sense when we think about that, like the goal for people in the United States is not survival, it's a lifestyle. And the reason why we work these kinds of hours aren't just to live a happy, fulfilled life. It's to hit some kind of lifestyle. Which
Christopher Lasch is going to argue actually has become necessary for survival. So We're going to talk about Lash. I'm excited about that.
But to kind of connect why we're talking about these things with like, well, we'll kind of get to like how consumer culture has kind of produced this beige, boring world that we live in. And it's helpful to see kind of how we got here, because that kind of answers the question, like, why are we bored? And it's not because the young people aren't working hard.
Yes.
It's because like this is the role that we have in our global economy. It's just to be the consumers. And what kind of a world do you live in where everything is just a consumable?
Yep.
But I think to kind of back up to get to that point, maybe we can take a look at William Kavanaugh's Being Consumed.
Yeah. This is a marvelous book. It's sort of a staple here at New Polity, and we certainly would recommend that. In fact, we will have already told you to read this for this particular episode. But you've read it more recently than me, so maybe you could...
So this book, I'm pretty sure, is on the website of our recommended books.
Yep.
Which I didn't read until very recently.
It's okay.
I mean, I do think it would be a really great way to introduce people to some of the ideas at New Polity in a way that's helpful. I think the first 3 chapters are really useful and more straightforward, and then it gets a little bit more difficult when he talks about von Balthasar. But
what doesn't get more difficult when it starts to discuss Balthasar?
Good point. So I thought what would be helpful is to kind of go over the first 3 chapters in this book. And let me take a look at my notes, because there's something from the very beginning that I thought was really great. So kind of in the introduction, he explains why he's writing this book, which is that like we tend to fall into a reactive Christianity. We tend to take our current economic realities as given. This is just kind of the natural world. And then we wonder, well, what should our stance be based off of our given reality?
Totally.
So to kind of look back at the, I guess, second episode that we did, like just imagining a world in which wage labor is not the norm, really helps you to see that, oh, actually the current economic reality isn't just the natural given. This is quite new, what we're in. And so our response shouldn't just be like, well, what should our stance be based off of like what the right and the left present to us?
Yes.
Because there's other, I don't know, there's been another kind of given, another kind of reality that's come before. So essentially what he's saying is that we're not actually faced with binary choices about right or left, yay free market, boo free market. And so we just need to change the terms of the debate. And so that's what he's seeking to do in this book. He kind of looks at different sets of binaries and say, are we actually really being asked to choose between the two? Or is there something more going on here? So the very first one that he talks about, that chapter is called Freedom and Unfreedom. And it's basically just looking at kind of the free market ideology. So like the binary is either you are for it or you are against it. But he wants to change the terms of the debate just by asking like when is a market really free? Yeah. And I think it would be worthwhile reading that chapter on your own, but my takeaway is we like to think that we live in a free market economy where I really am just an individual who's deciding that I want these things and I am freely buying whatever I want out of all of these choices, when in reality there's a lot more power dynamics that are at play that doesn't make all of my actions so free. Like there's just a massive like marketing system going on, as well as surveillance of all of my data. And if there's so much power on this other side to watch all of my purchasing habits, and then also influence me in like shaping and even creating and manufacturing my desire and even dissatisfaction with old products so that I go and buy new products, am I really free?
Yeah.
Is the free market really free if your average person is being told, I mean, it's not, you are being told what to buy out of options, and you might feel free to choose out of options.
But you're always constrained to buy.
Yeah.
So you're right that the power is in the hands of the people who can afford the marketing. And as Andrew Jones has really convincingly showed, I think in a podcast called Propaganda, which we could link to, the advertising firms of the 20th century that really run advertisements still came out of the propaganda departments of the First and Second World War. This wasn't just something that people were sitting around and saying, "Hey, what if we manipulate desires?" If you look at any ads prior to the wars, what you're going to notice is they're hilariously long and descriptive. So it'll be like, Jefferson toothpaste. Here are 10 things that Jefferson toothpaste will do for you. And it sometimes it's some bogus stuff. Like, I'm not saying that these kinds of ads are above lying or being quackery of some kind, but they actually conceived of themselves as delivering information on a product that a consumer could make a choice according to his or her desires. Like, the effort was to say, hey, I know you have a life and that life has goals, and I promise you that this product will help you attain those things you want. That breaks down entirely as we learn from propaganda that we don't have the time or convenience to be able, in the experience of the wars, we don't have the time or the convenience to be able to speak into what people want. We need them to buy war bonds now. And so what we need to do is manipulate other emotions in order for them to just do the thing we say. And so they found obvious ways, which seem to us obvious now, but were actually new, of associating acts that you do and products that you buy with things that aren't directly related to the product. So be a patriot, buy war bonds, can easily become what we hear now all the time. Be a patriot, buy Budweiser, or whatever it is. Not that there's any substantial connection, but there is now the use of unrelated desires in order to sell unrelated products.
Right. He kind of talks about that with branding. Like, you associate with a product a certain feeling, a certain experience, a certain status. And so that's what people are buying. And what he's trying to do is, because we know these things are happening,
yes.
But we don't really see that as being a part of a power dynamic.
Yeah.
Because when we think power, we think government, like people who have actual positions.
Sure.
And I think sometimes we have a hard time. I think it's probably easier now that people are waking, like we're a lot more self-aware.
Sure.
Kind of like what you're talking about with the advertisements.
Yes.
Like, the advertisements are aware of what they're doing, and they want you to know that they're aware of what they're doing, so that you don't feel so manipulated as they're manipulating you to buy their product.
Yeah, and if you are aware that you're being manipulated, because you're aware of it, you're actually superior in your very awareness of being manipulated, unlike those other suckers who don't know they're being manipulated. So now you can
freely choose this product that they're not manipulating you.
Yeah, because because they kind of winked at you. Yeah, oh my gosh, I know we're not talking about the Super Bowl, but again, it's the one thing I ever watch a year to know what's going on. And yeah, it was all like this constant stream of advertisements in which whatever the product was, it was always a celebrity who was suddenly and brashly interrupting some normal life in order to sell a product. And the reaction of the consumer, who you were obviously supposed to identify with, was of like awkward, nervous humor, like I was describing earlier. So that the pastiche of all this, the kind of the theme that comes out of all this, is one of, I am aware that this is being stuffed down my throat, but I'm still a little bemused and befuddled by the graspings of desire production from the ad agencies, which is depressing, actually, when you watch like 6 or 7 of those in a row. But at least there was football. in between.
So in the last section, I think it's the last section on judging when a market is free, he's talking about the real disparity of power between like these massive companies and marketing schemes, and then your average person, and it really just comes down to power. Like in the free market doesn't care whether or not the products that are being pushed are actually good or useful for the human person, actually help their flourishing. And probably if that was something that we did care about, we'd be buying very different products. And he has a whole discussion on, I guess, what is freedom? Is freedom just choice? Am I really free if I can choose all of these options, but I'm still feeling like constrained or not able to flourish as a human person?
Yeah, I think that's right.
But we probably shouldn't go down that rabbit hole. But that's kind of chapter 1.
Yeah, and I just want to read this last section because I think he summarizes what we say, and if nothing else, gives some authority besides Marc and Maria to this. The mass production of commodities in an ever-increasing abundance demands a mass market to absorb them, he says. The American economy, having reached the point where its technology was capable of satisfying basic material needs, now relied on the creation of new consumer demands, on convincing people to buy goods for which they are unaware of any need until the need is forcibly brought to their attention by the mass media. Advertising, said Calvin Coolidge, is the method by which the desire is created for better things. Then he goes on, in the period of primitive accumulation, which is when capitalism first rises up, capitalism subordinated being to having, the use value of commodities to their exchange value. That's that transition from things being made for use to being made for money and then exchange for commodities. Now capitalism subordinates possession itself to appearance and measures exchange value as a commodity's capacity to confer prestige. When economic necessity yields to the necessity for limitless economic development, the satisfaction of basic and generally recognized human needs gives way to an uninterrupted fabrication of pseudo-needs. And I think that's really important because both Kavanaugh and Lash are pointing out that it behooves the rulers of this earth not merely to make money by presenting new needs and having us fall for it, but also by establishing the conditions, some through advertising in some ways, but also through many other means, of a people who are powerless and are looking for needs, who are looking for salvation, as it were, from these new, from being given a new need and being shown here is where your happiness lies. Which is just to say that we can't have a people at peace and have our economy function. Can't have a people who say, oh, I know what enough is. It's when I have this much and that land and that's it. If we have that in an economy that survives by limitless growth as its goal, then the economy will be destroyed. It will crash. So what we need is a people who do not know what enough is. Right,
who are constantly restless. And that's, I think, the content of the second chapter of Kavanaugh's book. So he's looking at the binary of detachment and attachment, and he is saying, like, well, we all know that we live in this very materialistic consumer culture, and so you would think that what's going on is that we've just become so attached to material goods. But if we look a little bit deeper, we can see that there really isn't a whole lot of attachment to material goods, to the actual stuff. It's like to the whole like shopping, consuming experience. And he points at like how marketing is not only creating desires, but also creating dissatisfaction. Like you need the next updated product. He talks about planned obsolescence. And you basically need to shape an interior disposition within the people of like, this is never enough.
Right.
Because they're going to be, I mean, it's that desire that really runs the whole machine.
Absolutely. And I used to be kind of, I don't know. I had a chip on my shoulder about these rich people. I said, why are you manufacturing needs and making me want things and taking a hamburger and like putting a naked woman on it and saying like, buy this, you idiot. I used to get offended. But now I have a sympathy, actually, because I realize if you don't do this, we're all screwed.
Yep.
If you do not continuously awake consumption, the desire for consumption, whatever it is, the novelty itself, then our economy collapses. And I think this has created an unfortunately passive kind of person. Like getting used to shopping as like your dominant mode of salvation has created, a really passive person who basically sees life and history itself as this progression of things and stuff. Like stuff's getting better all the time, where they are less able to ask themselves the question of whether they are happy, whether the subjects of the cosmos and not the objects are happy. And so you have this phenomenon where, for instance, like people are not having very many children, which is a sure sign of unhappiness because you say yes to a child precisely in an affirmation of life being good. So we are becoming less fertile in ourselves, and yet our devices and the things that we make are described as being generative. So you have the iPhone 5 and then 6 and 7, and these are all generations of phones, as if the stuff that we buy has fertility and it grows, and we are these passive occupiers of a cosmos that we're inexplicably a part of. It's like everything's progressing. Everything's getting better all the time. Technology is growing. There's more and more things to buy. The standard of life, look at this graph. It's increasing. Look at it. It goes up. And we're there miserable and needy and consumptive and without ownership. But we all are like, yep, this is the best world that's ever been. Must be, because look, iPhone 11. iPhone 983. It's the best world. And I get to live in it and watch the iPhone procreate.
Bro.
Sorry. Anyways, so that makes us miserable, I think. But misery is precisely the condition for consumption. So it's not accidental. The meta ad, like is that me? Am I beeping? Oh, I put that in there. I'm so sorry.
You did.
Sorry, my dumb phone is smarter than me. The meta ad that we're all looking at is misery.
There was a couple things from this chapter that I thought was helpful. So like he's talking about like a world in which advertising is just everywhere. And he says that such a powerful formative system is not morally neutral. It trains us to see the world in certain ways. When everything that you encounter, if just ads are everywhere, it trains you to see things differently. It trains you to desire differently. It's not just kind of like what he was saying at the beginning of the book. It's not just the way that things are. It's not just a given.
It's not neutral.
It really changes our interior disposition. And he makes a comparison between what this is doing in Christianity. Like there is, so the detachment that he's describing is like an ability, you can kind of see it in just like throwaway culture. Like you get the thing, but then you're dissatisfied, and then eventually like it fades out. It's not fashionable anymore. Yeah. You throw away the thing. And so that's kind of cultivating a certain actual detachment to things, even like places, I think. Yeah. Homes, like we just pick up and leave. Like one city is just as good as another.
Yeah.
Like we're becoming more and more detached, which detachment really is a Christian virtue, and I think it can be very unsettling trying to understand detachment for the first time, because it's not that you want to develop like a passionless interior. It's just that since you know that your deepest satisfaction isn't going to come from stuff, the best stuff is going to be the stuff that God wants in your life right now. So you should be attached to the things that are there, but then if God takes them away and presents new things, you're not running after and grasping after that stuff. And so you have the spirit of detachment, but the kind of detachment that consumerism is producing in us is just kind of detaching us from things that are actually human, like from the things that we should actually be attached to. So in Christianity, like you become detached from the stuff that fades away, but you become attached to Christ. You become attached to like people, locality, virtue, like things that you want to like invest in for life, whereas you're kind of in that same system, but it's just reversed for consumerism.
Yeah, it's reversed because the goal of the society is different. So yeah, you have a detachment to things insofar as that detachment serves in the never satisfying you, and so constantly making you available for one more purchase, one more rented object, one more HelloFresh meal delivered, because this time it'll make you happy. Like Beyonce said? Somebody said. But yeah, Christian detachment works under the presupposition that we are striving to attain peace, not continued and never-ending war with ourselves, but peace in which we say, it's enough. I have found my place. I have found my people. I know who I am. I am God's. And then detachment of this sort turns to poverty as an actual desire, because then you move another step in the spiritual life where you're no longer simply saying, Lord, take from me what you will, but you're beginning an adventure of saying, Lord, this thing that you are not asking me necessarily to be rid of, I'm even going to try and be rid of this for the sake of greater intimacy with you, because you alone are God. And this is where you see this move towards saintliness that, I mean, really is a counsel of perfection is what we call it in the Christian tradition, because it's okay to have the money you need for your vocation, but it is a counsel of perfection to say, I will give even this away, trusting in you, Lord, because you are abundantly sufficient. You're not just like, anyway. So that whole mode is obviously horror talk to the rulers of this earth, because not only would the economy collapse if we all just found what was sufficient and didn't keep buying things and developing new desires, but in the Christian world order, this actually tends to send people who buy even less than suffices, who fast, who grow hungry, who go without, which is obviously not going to help the economy. Shame on you, monks.
But I mean, now I think we're starting to see like through what we've talked about so far, just the approaching the beige world. Come on, Mark.
I'm so sorry.
It's pathetic.
It's just beeping. It's Jacob and Mom. He's like, where are you?
It's
I'm
Jacob
podcasting. Sorry, Jacob. Be there soon. Must show how consumption as an ideology leads to transgenderism as a source of healing. All right. Go ahead.
So the third chapter, he's looking at the binary, the global and the local. I think this one is when it starts to get a little bit more difficult to read, because he starts talking about the philosophical problem of the one and the many. But this, I think, is when we start to really emerge into the beige world as our consumption economy has expanded to a global level. We all kind of have this experience of, I can choose just like endless variety, and yet I have this experience of the world being basically the same. I think the most obvious example of it is that if you went on a road trip across the entire United States, it doesn't matter where you go, like you will find the same Taco Bell, you'll find the same Panera, always next to a Chipotle. They're always together.
Yeah, it's true.
You
Symbiotic.
will run into like the same like beige suburban houses. I mean, there's obviously like variation, and there's an architecture in different places, especially like the East versus the West Coast, but usually that kind of stuff is older.
Yes.
Or it's like a modern beige version with just like Western themes.
Man, I could just talk about this, so we better move on, because that is very true. And it's also true that subsistence is a source of difference in the world. Like when people are involved in wage for the sake of commodities, inevitably you're buying the same commodities. Like the abstraction of money has an abstracting power because it can call forth identical transactions. But it's just very obvious that what we do when we need to introduce a new novelty into the consumptive world is we actually go to cultures who developed outside of this particular mode and try to extract and turn into commodities those things that they have. So it's like, oh, well, now we're all eating Thai food, or we used to eat Chinese food. And now, like, the hip thing to do is, I don't know what's hip, so I'm making things up, but, like, you know, it's sushi. And so we get, like, a little bit of that. Or we have the Mexican restaurant next to the Chinese restaurant. The kind of wealth of the world is grabbed, turned into commodities for consumption.
Like, Aztec pattern was really in.
Yeah. Yes.
It's not so much in anymore, but it was really, really in.
Even simplicity itself becomes the commodity that we sell to dissatisfied consumers. So, like, the really expensive things are like cottage type things, like decor that, I'm thinking of anthropology, I think, is like a very obviously like abstracted from an old world European culture where things are made for use and where they have a certain like handicraftness to them. And this is just a basic way of abstracting value from subsistence living and turning it into a commodity for consumption.
So I think kind of what he's getting at in this chapter is there's this general tension that we have of how do we synthesize the universal and the particular. Like, we all like kind of want to be united all together, kind of have this universal humanity thing uniting us, or share this one global economy together. And then how do we also preserve like locality and actual like difference in meaning? And the way that globalism has done this is just by destroying the local. Because in order for us to all share this global economy where we're all just like buying things together, you need a world in which like the fundamental assumption is that like we're all the same with all these variations that don't really matter at the end of the day. It doesn't matter what religion you are, just like pick one and just live in peace and coexist with everyone else. It doesn't really matter what traditions that you have. Just like pick one for yourself. It's I think he talks about globalization as being essentially mass individualism. Which is the opposite of like what tradition is. Like, tradition is the thing that you can't pick. Tradition is the thing that you can't change even if you want it to change.
You receive it. And when it's received in love, it bears fruit. And I've noticed this about this can sound really bleak, like we have no experience of like the resistance of the local, but I actually think we experience it all the time. I don't think this is like the victory of globalism. I think it's a effort at victory. And so I've just noticed that within friendships, within tight communities and groups, you become naturally resistant to just being advertised to for other things. Like maybe a pretty lame but typical example is that when you have someone who's brewing beer in your town, you're not really susceptible to advertisement that some other beer is the best beer because you already have that as a relationship of friends. Like, you already know who you're buying from and you want to buy it from them. And in so many ways, like, intense friendships and relationships make the whole world of consumerism seem kind of like a joke. Like I am not insufficient unto myself. I am not this void that desperately needs you to fill it up. Like, I know my people. I know where I'm from. I know my place. I know what I do. And so you being like, quick, buy strawberry scented Band-Aids or whatever. I don't know. I really don't know what's being made right now. It's just sort of becomes totally ridiculous and irrelevant.
But I think a lot of people don't have that experience.
Sure,
and I think that kind of sets us up for the conservative critique of like, oh, the kids are just bored these days. Right. It's like, all right, well, what is the work that we're doing? What is the world that we live in? Like, what I'm being told is just to be a consumer out of all these endless options that at the end of the day don't matter. They're all equally irrelevant. Because the important thing is just that I buy.
Yeah.
That's the world in which we live. And so,
yeah, and it seems like the younger people who are very online have developed a sort of permanent irony to them, which says something like, yes, I understand that it's all meaningless, but isn't it funny that I've chosen this thing out of so many? So like one of the jokes that only really makes sense within a like online meme sort of world is like the very random and sporadic devotion to a brand that you don't really care about. Like, I don't know. I can't even think of an example, but you all know it's true. It's just like a form of humor is like to imitate brand devotion in an age in which it doesn't even really convict anymore. Right. Which I think is part of the great anxiety that we're having right now as a nation, is that this thing isn't working. Like, it's not spiritually convicting.
Right.
You used to be able to like buy the right brands and be the person. And now we're like immensely conflicted and weird about it. It's like you have to buy the brands that show that you don't care about the brands in order to be the brand that isn't a brand. It's just like having a plain t-shirt is somehow like supposed to be a statement. We'll talk more about this. It's just like,
it's
breaking down a little bit. So yeah, so
it's not just like young people are online, young people aren't working hard.
No.
It's like this is a whole spiritual disposition that like we're being trained in to just consume, and it's boring because we do live in a beige world where everything tastes like rice crackers because everyone's kind of recognizing the irony that it doesn't really matter what you pick.
Yeah, when there's a recession, Kavanaugh points this out, you're just told to buy. Buy what? Doesn't matter. Just buy something, and then the economy will work, and you will have your lives still.
Right. And he's kind of, again, pointing out the Christian critique is like, well, actually, we do care about the content of what you buy because that's going to make you into a more flourishing person or not. But that's not something that a free market economy can say anything. Like, they have to be morally neutral. Just buy stuff, and we're not going to tell you what to buy. Because
the Christian imposition of a moral imperative on shopping means that there's a limit to it. And so it cannot coincide with the goal of infinite growth. If you can really say, no, don't get this and only get this much of that, then it doesn't work.
So if we're living in this kind of meaningless beige world where we're just told to consume and what you consume doesn't really matter, I think that kind of sets us up for like why we are driven so much into consuming for our identity production.
Yep.
Which really brings us into Christopher
Lasch.
Book.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Read Kavanaugh to get hip to the consumptive empire. And Lasch, that was a joke. I'm telling you the truth.
No one can hear Alex laughing in the back.
I know. Every time Alex laughs, it affirms us.
He needs his own mic.
Yeah, seriously. Okay. So I think to really bring this home, Christopher Lasch, in his book, The Culture of Narcissism, which sounds like a book where he's just going to be like, people are selfish these days, and it is not. It is not that. I definitely recommend it. It's a great read. And he, I think, bridges this gap. So we have consumption, and we're trying to answer the question of why just doing bizarre stuff with our gender is somehow the answer to this beige world. Like, why are we turning to this? And I think Lasch is important to look at for 5 reasons, which I have written down.
Nice.
And we'll be reading.
To kind of rephrase the question, because I don't know if we really talked about it at the beginning. But like, yeah, like we are doing things because we're bored, but why gender? There's a lot of things that we could be doing out of boredom. Like why aren't we like pulling like crazy stunts or I don't know what the thing to do could be.
Yeah. Like why don't we, I don't know, work on the jetpack that we were supposed to get instead of figuring out, whether we're tri or quadrigendered. And I think this is so Lasch. Lasch is a brilliant sociologist. He has written so many wonderful things. I'm becoming Lasch-pilled.
Lashian.
I'm lashed to the pillar here. So the 5 things that I pulled out here are all ways of evidencing what I think is his fundamental point, that the creation of an image of ourselves has become necessary to our survival, that this defines the transition from the sort of 1950s through the 60s and 70s into the 80s. And I think that now, 40 years later, looking back at this book, it's only become more apparent that he was totally correct.
Mm-hmm.
Often this book reads like an eerie prophecy, and I wonder, why is he talking about like photography when he should be talking about Instagram? And then I remember, unfortunately, Lash has passed away, and he wrote this a while ago. So that idea that creating an image of yourself is necessary, for me, really is the bridge to understanding why gender matters. Because gender is quite literally an image within ourselves. Like, I can speak about yourself, I can speak about myself, and then when I tell you I'm male, I'm saying that this self that I am isn't just contentless, it is an image, it's crafted in a certain way somehow. So the 5 things that I want to point out. Number 1, one more thing to say. He's diagnosing our whole society with narcissism. And narcissism isn't simply, he means this in a Freudian sense. I'm not going to go down this because I would not do it justice. But he doesn't mean it simply as like you're very self-centered, although it does include being self-centered. But that you're actually terrified about what other people think of you, and that you're terrified of death and aging in any way, and that you have this sense of yourself, which Freud argues is from an early trauma regarding your parents and the way they raise you, and then in your relationship to them. You have this sense of yourself as omnipotent that constantly meets failure and frustration in real life. And so I do think this describes a lot of people. I think it describes myself. I am very guilty of narcissism, as I was mentioning earlier to you. I will not be so confessional on the pod, but okay. The first thing he notes in the late 20th century, a transition from politics to identity politics, and he doesn't call it identity politics. This word hasn't become as mainstream as it is now. But I would phrase it like this. Politics, which has the goal of building the world in a certain way, and even politics as it's understood in the 19th and 20th centuries, which it has this emphasis on righting wrong and correcting injustice, gives way to politics which has as its fundamental unspoken goal the therapeutic or the healing of a lack of belonging in the person. So politics becomes a way in which to belong to a community. Politics becomes a way in which to belong to a family. The thing that it solves for people is their feeling of atomization, alienation, and loneliness, and not really being someone, as it's often described in modernity. And he's really good at showing how the crises and phobias of like 18th century are all like, I'm repressing something sexually and it's coming out as this crazy itch on my leg. It's like weird object stuff. And then as you get into the 20th century, it's people showing up to therapists being like, I don't feel like I am anyone. There's just nothing inside me. It's this very bizarre transition from a kind of insanity and phobia and mania and what do all the women have? Hysteria. That kind of like fades away, and it's just people coming in and saying like, I don't feel like I'm anyone. I imitate people compulsively because I don't have a self. And of course, this becomes its own industry. But this move to identity politics is I think very obvious and important. I'll quote another book. This is Mary Eberstadt wrote a book called Primal Screams, where she basically points out, and I think this is right, that with the destruction of the family and the sexual revolution, to give it a broad slap as far as what happened, you have less and less sources of identity for the person. So normally we're constituted, if we're going to ask the question of who we are, and I believe it is important, who we are.
It's going to be a relational answer.
I am the daughter of this man and his wife. I am a son. I am a brother to a sister, or I'm a brother to a brother. I'm nephew to an uncle. I'm friends with this people. I belong to this place.
Right. Even defining yourself by work is still relational.
Totally.
Like, I am a teacher. I do these things for these young people.
Absolutely. And if I have a critique of Mary Eberstadt's book, is that she makes it all just about these sort of interfamilial relationships and the lacks that come once you have divorce and contraception. But I also think it's like, no, the removal of people from place and belonging is something that was already at work long before the 60s. But I think it's really potent in her work because she's saying, okay, so now for the first time, you have families where what's normal is to grow up with less of these identity-building relationships, right? So it can be normal not to know your mother or your father. She quotes children of sperm donors who say things like, I only have half a self, I don't know who I am. You have families that are very disparate and spread apart, and so that there's no nephew. You never experience what it is to be a nephew, to be a niece, something like that,
right?
Because you don't know those people. And I think very importantly, there's more and more people that have never had a sister or a brother. So the reduction of birth rate to basically 2 children tops means that inevitably you have less experiences of who you are in relation to different kinds of people. And this is profoundly true. I mean, like, I'm watching my kids, and it's like having a relationship of one person to a sister is very different than having just a relationship to a brother or just being an only child. It's not to say like you're not a real person unless you have this. It's just saying there's a certain way of having identifying yourself in and through asking yourself the question of these relationships. I mean,
yeah, I guess you can kind of think of it like you have like these, like, your relationships are almost like nodes of attachment, and since you have more, then you have more stability because you have all these people who are reminding you who you are.
Right. You could think of them as mirrors, but then you would think of it as a reflection of yourself. It's not that. It's that they are
grounding you,
virtue building. They're both making and telling you who you are. Like when your father says, you are my son, he's not just identifying some object thing. He's in relationship to you, whereby you are rising up, becoming like him, learning from him, deciding not to be like him even, but you're crafting your character in relation to someone. And so you have a more stable answer when you know your father versus not knowing your father.
Right.
And so she's just making, I think, the very simple and obvious point that if you destroy the family or just make it a common experience for many people that they do not have this web of relationships, or that it's very minuscule, then you're going to have a crisis of identity. And that politics then has a therapeutic function of giving people their fathers back, giving them their mothers, giving them their brothers and sisters. And it's felt, not so much in this way, but it's felt as becoming someone. Who am I? Well, I belong to this particular movement. And this is why often you'll hear these things, especially within politics, that people are part of communities. Like I'm part of the white community is what, people say, or I'm part of the LGBT community. They're not. Like a community.
Got to live next to each other.
Got to share a meal.
Yeah.
But it's mostly like online identifications.
Right.
And this can be something just to make fun of, but I think it actually makes sense when you think of it as therapeutic. It's like, well, it is solving for that person that need for belonging. So it has its primary purpose. But then what happens to politics is it becomes something that's very enmity-based, because identity politics gathers people together in community and solves their need for healing on the basis of some common enemy.
Right.
Typically. It's very rarely that you have like a community, an identity community, a political movement to clean up the park. It's like that's not typical. It's much more like to eradicate injustice, to destroy the man, to fight the capitalist machine, to break heteronormativity, or whatever it is. It's always an enemy that gives stability to the group. And what this does, unfortunately, is it makes these groups really ineffective, because they need that enemy to persist in order to continuously generate, as it were, to father forth the group. If the enemy goes away, then that community loses its reason for being. And that wouldn't be a problem if it was politics. If we were just talking about politics, then the goal would be to get something done. And when that thing's done and the enemy's destroyed and that guy's dead or whatever your goal was, dissipation back into your normal life is a joy. You did it. You accomplished the goal.
Right.
But within identity politics, accomplishing the goal is a horror, because the moment you do it, then you've lost the community, the belonging. And that was the reason that really set you off, motivated towards radical politics in the first place.
Right.
Lash does a wonderful job in tracking the lives of many people that are involved in radical politics in the 60s and 70s, and just quoting them on in terms of like, well, what did you feel when you joined the Weathermen or something? And it's all of this therapeutic, self-dramatized like language where you would say things like, I felt like I finally was someone. I was basking in their light. I wasn't just no one anymore. I belonged. I found my family. And it's like, wait, what were your goals? What did you believe? I found my family. I know who I am. You know what I mean? Like it has a secondary relevance, but not a primary one. Mm-hmm. Okay. All of which is to say, you can start to see how people are more concerned in this particular era with image versus reality, and with a certain healing that they need. Mm-hmm. And this is why he diagnoses the culture with narcissism, is because he really does think it's something like that cries out for healing.
Right. And it's not just like a lot of people are selfish. Like this is a real problem. Like we really do need belonging. We don't function well without it. And you have limited options. Like you have to find community. And if all you have is your online community, I mean, like I know lots of people who are in that situation.
Yes. Yep.
Like their online friends really carried them through the most difficult times in their life. And
absolutely. Like
there is an effectiveness there.
And I've heard many people who have detransitioned will discuss this sometimes about their online communities, where, and I want to be really clear here, because what I'm not saying is that this need for a community sufficiently explains transgenderism or something like that, because then it would totally be open to the question of, well, why gender and not some other thing, right? Why didn't we all just get involved in radical politics? The detrans people that discuss this often have felt manipulated, but didn't realize that at the time, because they felt, well, I think we all feel, which is this desperate lack of community, a need to belong, and the inability to really know ourselves, because we actually don't know others. So we don't have a lot of friends. Our families are not strong. We don't have clear father figures or mothers. There's just something missing, whatever it is. And so we find in a movement this like dose of belonging that gives us peace, because we really need it.
Right.
We need that healing. And the reason that these detrans people that I'm thinking of feel manipulated is because it's so easy when someone is receiving that therapy from a community to immediately associate it with a solution to like the problem of your maleness or your femaleness. So then it becomes this way of saying, like, okay, the peace you feel is really because you're a woman, not a man. You're a man, not a woman. You are breaking free of heteronormativity, and you're exploring these options. And the community can provide a kind of language of healing. And then it's very easy, I think. I don't know that I certainly wouldn't be able to resist this sort of thing. Like to say, yes, like in order to belong to the community, I'm going to affirm what it believes. And part of what it believes is that my gender is what's really making me miserable. And obviously, since I'm feeling more at peace now that I'm talking to this community, they must be right. Right. Like it is my gender that's making me miserable, because now that I'm exploring this transgenderism,
thing with them, I am feeling more at peace with myself. Yeah,
and that's the sort of feeling of manipulation that a lot of people have. And it also explains why so many of people's stories of both transition and then detransition are really stories of finding groups. They're not stories necessarily of just sitting in your room and like interpreting your own experience and coming to the conclusion that you're female versus male, male versus female, whatever it is. Mm-hmm. But they're stories of finding belonging for the first time.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're right. When I was, what you said struck me about needing other people to know ourselves, which is true. Like when you are just sitting by yourself, just conceiving of yourself just starts to get very weird very quickly.
Yeah.
Or even when, I I mean, you do need to step away from other people to get to know yourself, but when you're stepping away from other people to really explore yourself, what you're doing is going through the content of your life and looking at how you interact with people.
Mm-hmm.
Like when you're doing that processing, it really is through other people that you come to know yourself.
I would advise everyone who's interested in this sort of thing, read Marcus Aurelius's Meditations. He begins it, he's a Stoic, but he begins it as he lays out his philosophy on just saying who gave him what. So he's like, my uncle gave me this. My aunt gave me that. His beginning of wisdom, of reflection, is just what you're describing, like asking who I am on the basis of what I have received, which is why Stoicism was such an obvious it was a natural transition for many parts of Christianity, unlike many other pagan religions.
I was supposed to read that book years ago.
Do it. Just read that part. It's so beautiful.
I still feel guilty about skipping that assignment. Because I feel like that's one that just everyone should read.
It is, yeah.
And so I have to pretend like I've read it.
That's good.
I nod my head.
So that need for belonging, I think, is mocked by people on the right when they make the sort of biological reduction and interpret transgenderism as just a phenomenon of needing to have a job and being bored. And what I mean is this: to have a good and holy and healthy view of man and woman requires holiness all around. It requires a good society. And we seem to be about the business, and I'm sure that I'm guilty of this in different places in writing perhaps, but we seem to be about the business of just saying we can change the gender thing, but still have all these commitments to an atomized world. It's like, who are we? We're people that think men are men and women are women, and identity is clear, and we're pro-capitalist. And we don't see that by pushing ourselves down the capitalist line and being unwilling to move away from it, we're creating the very conditions of atomization by which transgenderism is so appealing.
Right.
It's like we're creating a world in which people don't belong, and then we're mad at them for feeling like they belong to a group that presents itself as radical and as something healing. And I think that's I hope we can reflect on that. That's all.
Yeah. No.
Examine the conscience.
That is really important.
All right, last part 2. He says that modern work is essentially objectless. He says this in a lot of places in a lot of different ways, but his basic point is one that we've already made, so I'm not going to just try to say it myself. I'm going to just read from him. So he's talking about different sociologists who are studying what makes success in this age as compared to others. And he quotes, "For the corporate manager on the make, power consists not of money and influence, but of momentum, a winning image, a reputation as a winner. Power lies in the eye of the beholder, has no objective reference at all." And this, Lash argues, is increasingly characteristic of a consumptive society, because as you have less and less production, you also have less and less standards of excellence that
like objective
define
standards.
Success.
Like,
yeah.
I have completed this task, I've done this thing, and people can look at it and say, oh, look, you've done this thing, well done, you have succeeded.
Right.
And as all these jobs transition into jobs that never really end, or
Yes.
it's just like, you're the social media coordinator.
Totally.
How successful really are
Right.
you?
Yeah, I mean, it starts when we deprive people of the ability to see themselves in their labor. That's called alienation. They're no longer there in their work. But you can see how in a consumptive society in which it doesn't matter what people buy, it also doesn't really matter what people produce or what their work produces, so long as it elicits the buying, the shopping, the impulse. And shopping, detached from any human needs, is motivated more by someone's charisma, by their confidence, by their ability to make you feel like you want to be like them because they've obviously got it.
Yeah.
They're winning. You want to, it's like, why are you getting into Bitcoin? Do you understand it? No, but, I want to win. And it seems like it's the thing. So obviously now all wealth, the production of actual profits of success is sort of a secondary move to the celebrity status of our wealthy. Lash points this out. There used to be a character of the man no one knew, but who was really behind the curtain and was making all the money and who was immensely powerful, but you didn't know who he was. Now that's a character that's fading from modernity. What we have is like a weird, like our wealthy class are also our celebrities who we know everything about, like our Musk and our Bezos, and they're all constantly trying to, get us to watch them. It's like, and conservatives feel this and they get mad in some ways. They're like, aren't you supposed to just be making money? Because they don't realize, it seems to me, that in a consumptive society, image is what makes money, because it's not important what's made. What's important is that people buy it. Yeah.
So I guess kind of going back again to the critique of the kids are just bored and not working. Like now we live too in a world where, like, that the work that you're doing really isn't that meaningful.
Yes.
At the end of the day, I remember before the podcast, you were talking about how you're not just a cog in a machine anymore, because we're not really producing the things anymore.
Yes.
Like your company is just one like teeny tiny part in this massive process. And this is just like I'm looking at a lot of my friends and the jobs that they're doing. It's not, so many people just have meaningless jobs, and it's not like doing some meaningless job is suddenly going to fulfill people or keep people from being bored. That's just going to increase the feeling of beige, increase the feeling of meaninglessness.
Yes. Yeah. I'm going to read Lash because I think it goes right to that. So he says, in a society in which the dream of success has been drained of any meaning beyond itself. And he does a real great genealogy where it's like we have this desire for success that's attached to like our standing in society, and gradually that gives away just to making money in society. But even then, the money is like an important mark of success, to today when the money is not so important as winning, as being a character, being a sort of celebrity.
Kind of the image that's produced on the other side.
Yeah. So in a society in which the dream of success has been drained of any meaning beyond itself, men have nothing against which to measure their achievements except the achievements of others. Self-approval depends on public recognition and acclaim, and the quality of this approval has undergone important changes. The good opinion of friends and neighbors, which formerly informed a man that he had lived a useful life, rested on appreciation of his accomplishments. Today, men seek the kind of approval that applauds not their actions, but their personal attributes. That is so true. Oh my gosh. And I'm totally guilty. I can speak of this as one who's guilty. It's like, what did I actually do? What did I actually write? Oh, don't worry about that. I got charisma. But that is, he's saying, Lash is ultimately saying, like, that's not just because I'm a narcissist. He has convicted me of that. But also because I live in a world in which narcissism
is necessary for survival. That's how you climb the hierarchy.
Within a society that just needs consumption, then all you need is charisma that convinces people to consume, which goes back to those ads. Like what the ads in the Super Bowl were doing, were not even daring to pretend to show me the necessity of the product. They were just like winking at me and saying, aren't I charismatic? Don't you want to be like me? And then associating the product with it. Today, men seek the kind of approval that applauds not their actions, but their personal attributes. They wish to be not so much esteemed as admired. They crave not fame, but the glamour and excitement of celebrity. They want to be envied rather than respected. Pride and acquisitiveness, the sins of an ascendant capitalism, have given way to vanity. Lash is brilliant in that we can often think that greed and acquisitiveness is still the mark of success. It's still the goal. It's still the sin of our society today. But he's saying, no, it's vanity.
Oh, yeah,
Vanity
100%.
has been made effective.
It's especially clear with influencers.
Yes.
Curating this image and being vain and particular about the way that you present yourself to other people. Like that's the thing that sells.
Yeah, absolutely. What a man does matters less than the fact that he has, quote, made it. Whereas fame depends on the performance of notable deeds, acclaimed in biography and works of history. Celebrity, the reward of those who project a vivid or pleasing exterior or have otherwise attracted attention to themselves is acclaimed in the news media and gossip columns on talk shows and magazines devoted to personalities. Accordingly, it is... Okay, so he goes on. Success in our society has to be ratified by publicity. This is the point I was reading earlier. The tycoon who lives in personal obscurity, the empire builder who controls the destinies of nations from behind the scenes are vanishing types. Even non-elective officials have to keep themselves constantly on view. All politics becomes a form of spectacle. He actually makes the argument that the reason we lost Vietnam is because we fought that war under this new presumption of success. And our whole argument for going to Vietnam was because we had to protect our image. We had to protect the American image.
Oh, wow.
We were worried about what other nations would think about us. There wasn't like a goal. And so it's very critical about that. And so so if that is true, then
it's just like the performance is necessary.
Yes.
Like being like in order to survive, you have to perform in our narcissistic consumer culture.
Totally.
You have to produce this image in order to succeed. Which is true. I mean, like so many of the good jobs are all about connections.
Yeah.
And you get connections from relationships with people, but also just the image that you curate. Mm-hmm. Or I'm thinking of like dating culture right now. Like you have to have an Instagram or some kind of like social media platform where you can advertise like this is the kind of person that I am.
Yeah.
And you have to curate this like particular image.
Yeah, in some ways, Instagram and LinkedIn and just social media generally is a technological fulfillment of a need that is being really produced, and Lash is already seeing in the 80s, where it has become necessary to have an image of yourself that you can control and curate and present in order to win people over. So your actual works don't matter, results don't really matter, goals don't matter, except for insofar as they serve the image. Right. Which, as I'm saying this, that's just what the stock market is. Oh man, I made this connection. Okay, sorry, 1 sec, it's coming out. The stock market is just the mechanism by which, it's just a particular mechanism by which vanity becomes efficacious.
Right.
Because a company projects an image of itself, and then you want to invest in it, and the stock price indicates not any profit, not any value creation by that company
but what
itself,
other people think
but
of
what
it.
other people think about that company. Vanity has been made efficacious. Lash is right. Vanity is the sin.
Vanity rules.
Yeah. So, and part of the result of vanity having become efficacious within a consumptive society is that it's not the case that everyone is just suddenly waking up and being vain and taking selfies and such.
It's like, look at these selfish, stupid kids.
Yeah, which is ridiculous because it's older people who take the most selfies. I mean, I don't lie to me. It's the old people who are posting right alongside everyone else because posting is a form of social survival now. Mm-hmm. Lash points this out in the 80s that everything becomes work when your very image is your capital. And people even talk like this positively, like you got to create your own personal brand. We're just like literally doing what he was saying.
And so now leisure is a place of work because this is an opportunity for me to take a picture of like my perfect family, of my vacation, of my lifestyle. I mean, I remember when I did have social media, just like kind of the general anxiety that I felt of like, oh, like should I like be taking a picture of this? Like it was just weird how that thought was constantly around and was following me. Even though like I don't think I like came off as a particularly vain person, that's just what you were in. Yeah,
the curation and production of a good image of yourself is how you succeed. It's how you succeed in dating. If you're a guy, it's how you succeed in business. If your business
and you really have to. And I'm like I'm lucky to be in a situation where I don't have to.
Yeah.
And so it's easy for me to like point the finger and criticize other people, but I mean I I don't have to.
Yeah, let's read Lash once more, because he kind of sends this home, and he talks about the way that this turns all of life into a sort of theater, the stakes of which are sort of social survival, where you successfully craft that image. Efficacious vanity, I think we would call it.
Ooh, good band name.
All right. His point is that this is the end of spontaneity or enjoyment of things, because spontaneity and enjoyment, and we'll talk about this when it comes to sex and the body, really relies on being out of control or losing control, letting go of the image that you produce of yourself. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you've ever seen someone who's really deep in this thing disallow themselves from bursting out and laughing. It's a very horrible thing, but I've seen it very often, where their laugh is a calculated laugh, or they look at you and they say, "That's so funny," instead of laughing, and you're like, "Was it funny?" But there is, generally speaking, within our consumptive society, there is a sort of movement against spontaneity and of things revealing themselves, of the body like bubbling over, breaking over. We have an increased horror of the body as sort of going on without us, it seems, because it's necessary for us to be able to control it and to craft an image. Mm-hmm. Social media is a way of being able to apply makeup to your own corpse and make sure it's an attractive funeral for yourself, because what you put out there is of you. It is your decision. The body doesn't speak apart from yourself. I mean, I think this is why sex is such a scandal, why there's a certain move towards androgyny and sexlessness. It's because sex is that thing within us that we don't choose. Like puberty should have taught us something, that it is just coming out, and we're observing. And that puts us in a humbling situation. It's awkward and embarrassing, and especially for someone who's supposed to be in control of their image. So there's a reason why I think gender confusion or the decision to be trans as an identity increasingly associates itself with puberty and with early high school, precisely because the what is being interrupted by puberty is your ability to have a coherent and decided image of yourself, which life depends on in some ways.
I mean, I can see this especially making sense for women, especially going through puberty, because suddenly you can't control other people's reaction to you. Mm-hmm. And we live in a world where that reaction just is not always virtuous. And that is not only like a humbling experience now, but it's very often a humiliating experience that you can't control.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so this is Lash. Self-consciousness, the self-consciousness that mocks all attempts at spontaneous action or enjoyment, derives in the last analysis from the waning belief in the reality of the external world. As the workings of the modern economy and the modern social order become increasingly inaccessible to everyday intelligence, art and philosophy abdicate the task of explaining them. That wasn't exactly what I wanted to read. Reality thus presents itself to laymen and scientists alike as an impenetrable network of social relations, a role-playing, the presentation of the self in everyday life. To the performing self, the only reality is the identity he can construct out of materials furnished by advertising and mass culture, themes of popular film and fiction, and fragments torn from a vast range of cultural traditions, all of them equally contemporaneous to the contemporary mind. In order to polish and perfect the part he has devised for himself, the new Narcissus gazes at his own reflection, not so much in admiration as in an unremitting search of flaws, signs of fatigue, decay. Life becomes a work of art, and the first artwork in an artist, as Norman Mailer says, is the shaping of his own personalities. All of us, actors and spectators alike, live surrounded by mirrors. In them we seek reassurance of our capacity to captivate or impress others, anxiously searching out the blemishes that might detract from the appearance we intend to project. The advertising industry deliberately encourages this preoccupation with appearances. In the 1920s, the women in ads, he's quoting a sociologist here, were constantly observing themselves, ever self-critical. A noticeable proportion of magazine ads directed at women depicted them looking into mirrors. Ads of the 1920s were quite explicit about this narcissistic imperative. They unabashedly use pictures of veiled nudes and women in autoerotic stances to encourage self-comparison and to remind women of the primacy of their sexuality. A booklet advertising beauty aids depicted on its cover a nude with the caption, "Your masterpiece, yourself." Today, the treatment of such themes is more explicit than ever. Moreover, advertising encourages men as well as women to see the creation of the self as the highest form of creativity. And if you'll bear with me, I'm going to read one more thing. In an earlier stage of capitalist development, industrialization reduced the artisan or peasant to a proletarian, stripped him of his lands and tools, and stranded him in the marketplace with nothing to sell but his labor power. In our time, the elimination of skills, not only from manual work, but from white-collar jobs as well, has created conditions in which labor power takes the form of personality rather than strength or intelligence. Men and women alike have to project an attractive image and to become simultaneously role players and connoisseurs of their own performance.
Well,
you got to get rid of your Instagram. I mean, if you can't hear that and not delete it, I don't know. That's going to be tough.
But I love how how glorious it sounds. Like enter into the world of art. Mm-hmm. Like craft your own image. You are your own masterpiece, and how simultaneously glorious and epic that sounds, but also just horrible. Just anxiety inducing.
Well, there's no life. There's no first person existence. There's no leisure. There's no breath. It's just and I see this in
it's the thing that
people.
we all fear: work without rest.
Work without rest. The constant need to present yourself in a certain way, and to be constantly responsible for failure. I mean, you now can fail at your gender. We mentioned this, like being a woman, being a male, being a properly I don't want to use the word woke, but that's what strikes me because that's how we speak. But like, you are always responsible for doing the thing. It's all well and good to talk about, we're just performing our gender now, but what we forget is that actors' performances can be judged and are judged as bad. And that is the new reality that Lash is saying, look, this isn't something Butler invented. This isn't something that just happens to do with gender. We are all part of an economic and social reality that prioritizes vanity as an efficacious way of getting that money and surviving.
Right. And that's kind of like your initiation into meaning. And I think your initiation into gender, because I was just reflecting when we were sharing this earlier, like when you are looking for what it means to be a man and woman, like we all know the idea of initiation ceremonies. That's not the word.
Rites of passage.
Rites of passage, which we don't have today. And then I was trying to think of what would that really be in a Christian society? Because there was kind of that, but also kind of not. But I think it would make sense that you would be entered into this gendered world. Like you would very much like enter into a rite of passage because you are doing the work of the women, the adult women. You're doing the work of the adult men. And when you were able to enter into that world as an adult, like that was your very clear like rite of passage. And like gender was something that you received instead of it's something that you have to consume and post and then sell and then check and see like are other people buying it. Is the way that I presented myself, my particular brand of woman, my particular brand of man. Is this something that like people want? Is this something that like people look at this and go, oh yeah, that checks out? Yes, absolutely. I think it helps explain a phenomenon that otherwise is a little mysterious, that we live on the one hand in an age of transgenderism, and on the other hand we live in an age of the gender reveal party. We are beyond gender, and people are blowing up their houses to declare gender at the same time. And it's not the case that it's the conservatives that are doing the gender reveal party as like some kind of, stick it to rebellious
no. These are the white liberals in the suburbs just being wild with their gender reveal. And I think one of the things that what helps me to what helps explain this phenomenon is the fact that gender is kind of the first image that we have of the person. And in a world in which image becomes this important, it's not simply that the only people that are crafting the image of gender that are kind of deliberately constructing it. It's not like it's just the gender constructionists. The point is that in our world, everyone is doing that, and this is true as much as if you are a red-blooded heterosexual who is posting pictures of himself lifting and trying to own the libs thereby. Like, your fundamental position in doing that is one in which you are detached from your sex and are posting it. You are projecting it as an image that you think will work, that will succeed in some way. Like, your vanity is efficacious. And this is as true if what you're posting is that you have, like, who's the guy, Andrew Tate type vibes and a trad wife. When our relationship to the real is one in which it's a vain posting for the sake of survival in a world in which vanity has become increasingly necessary, you're not actually doing something different than the trans person who is saying, well, I'm just this pre-cultural thing who gets to construct gender through, wearing these pants and cutting my hair this way and taking hormones. You know what I mean? Like, we want to make it really different, but if we're all posting, then it's kind of all the same Subway. It's like you can choose your heterosexual sandwich, your homosexual sandwich, your trans sandwich. At the end of the day, you don't have any property and you're going to eat the sandwich, Sorry, maybe that wasn't exactly as elucidating as I hoped.
But I mean, I appreciated this part of the discussion even before the podcast. It's like we're all living in the same world.
Yeah.
And so it's not like what's happening with transgenderism is like this like unique phenomenon. Like, we're already living in a world where identity is what matters. We don't really receive our identity and sense of belonging from like stable locality and relationships. We live more and more in a world of like broken relationships where identity is like something unstable and we're looking for belonging. And so we all are just doing this to various degrees depending on our position in life.
Yeah.
And I think it is helpful to stop and reflect and see, like, where am I doing this in this system? Because it is kind of unavoidable. Yeah. Like, all the things that, like, we were talking about with, like posting and curating this image, like, I've certainly done. And, like, feeling, like, the anxiety to, like, create an image in order to, like, sell yourself. I think that's something that we're all doing, and I think it's helpful to point out the places where like on the right this is happening too, because then you start to see it as being a phenomenon that just expands beyond just what the left are doing. I mean, kind of what you were saying with Andrew Tate and kind of the trad wife thing. It seems to me a lot of what is happening is like trying to access something real, but doing it also through stereotypes, which is the thing that we often accuse the transgender movement of doing, trying to access this real thing through stereotypes. But the truth is, even for like we don't live in the 1950s by just kind of cosplaying like this world with these clothes and these roles isn't actually going to get us to that reality. It's just as impotent.
This goes right back to our first discussion, the first episode of this podcast, where we said that love is the way that men and women come to know each other. and that when you try to freeze and arrest man and woman as an image or as an object, then you have the wrong object. You're not looking at the real thing. I think this is obviously the conclusion of a world of vanity, is that the only acceptable forms of being a man, of being a woman, or being trans, being gay, being straight, are things we can post. They have to become objects that we can put forward as an image of ourselves that we remain in control of. They don't go on without us. We are in control of them, and we can operate them to various degrees of efficacy. There's a reason why this sort of craziness is also concomitant with the rise of the internet, where we actually have the capacity to simply present ourselves from a place of control, and not to be given in our bodies to interpretations by others, to the actual shape of our bodies, to angles that we didn't want, the various ways in which the body speaks itself and speaks us, even when we would rather it doesn't. The internet provides us a certain cure for that. Right. Right. So I think that.
Well, I also I thought it was helpful when we were talking earlier that like we are experiencing an increasing pressure to control and project this image of yourself, because that's how you survive, that's how you succeed. So you have to do this, and we feel like a restlessness, like a disconnect, when we know that our life and the image don't correspond. Like the idea of what we would like ourselves to be like in our life aren't lining up, because when we do look at other people, like you naturally assume that the image that you're seeing lines up to the reality and the life that they're living, but you don't get to actually experience their subjective frame. So there is kind of this continued restlessness of trying to control the image and then coordinate both life and the image to be the same, which you can really only do by like continuous consumerism, by this continuous like perfecting of myself, not only online but like offline with the stuff that I have, or like creating the masterpiece of myself.
Yes, creating the masterpiece of yourself. That's right. Yeah, the René Girard writes very movingly about this, and he calls it metaphysical desire, which you don't really need to remember that. It's just the desire to be someone else. And the way he describes it is that when we look at other people, just like you said, their appearance and their being seems to have done what it doesn't do in us, found a unity.
Right.
And we want that. We want to be unified. We want to be who we are. The image and the life are one thing. We're not many things dragged along. We are ourselves. We want to be ourselves. That's the fundamental call of not just Christianity. Well, yeah, Christianity, but morality. It's like to be whole, to be ourselves. And when we see other people, we can get the sense that they've got it. Right. Even though if we give it a little reflection, we know that they are also projecting this image, that they are also not necessarily they don't necessarily have a conformity between who they are and the way they appear. But when we want it from them, then envy is the natural result. So we want to be the object.
Like I wish that I had the simplicity that this person has.
Yes.
Like they have this image, and this image is successful, and like I just perceive them as being a simple being, which their life and their image is the same thing. And I envy that because I experience this disjointedness within myself.
And in some way, I think it's why in an age of such great vanity and such a lack of belonging and searching for solidity, that the other sex appears as an object of possible consumption rather than of love. Because in love, you say, you remain you, and I remain I, and let us look at each other and speak to each other until we die, because we're never going to...
Sorry, it rhymed.
Did it?
Yeah.
All right. And I didn't even know it. We're going to allow that difference to remain. And love is precisely that love of the difference. Whereas when we have envy and we're in vanity, we're inspired to see people enviously. You can look at, like as a man, you can look at women, and unlike your sex, which you can only live subjectively, like I can never know, people ask us all the time, like, what's it like to be male? It's like, well, I don't know because I am male. It's not an object to me floating out there that I can observe. Like, wow, one sec, let me get my telescope. I see that being male is having nipples that are flat. Well, sorry, that's not the useless, I should have said. They're useless. It doesn't work like that because within my experience, I can't abstract maleness into an object apart from subjectively living it. Occupying it, being it, and it's
you don't
women.
get to be an observer because it is you.
And this can appear in an age of vanity as a great crisis because it means that within me there's a detachment between who I am and my image that I just can't heal. Like I want to consume my own image and I can't, and it's frustrating. It's like, how can I occupy this maleness when I can't even describe it because I'm so intimately close to it. I am it. That I can never possibly buy it off a shelf or take it and do 7 steps to become it. And you see this in heterosexual behavior as much as homosexual, as much as transgenderism, which is like men desperately trying to push their masculinity out into a number of products that they can buy in order to confirm that they're men, which you wouldn't even do unless it was some crisis within yourself, like unless like you needed it to become distant so you could consume it again to have a life image correspondence. It's like, all right, I'm buying beard oil and
cigars.
Got a
the
truck,
obsession with cigars.
smoking 8 of them.
I mean, I appreciate it. It's great. It's good
why.
that men do that, but yeah, it is kind of funny to find people doing that and knowing why they're doing it is not because of the cigar, but because it's the thing that they're doing with the boys. It's making them men. Totally, yeah.
And within this, it's because sometimes a cigar is not just a cigar.
Yeah.
Sometimes it is a phallus. So that's a Freud joke, in case anyone's still here. Within this, women can appear as an object of envy because your sex, it seems from my perspective, is an object. It's not something that I have saturated with myself. It's not the thing that I've already eaten and so now I'm looking for something else. It's the thing I don't have. And it's not that I just want it because I'm like greedy and I want to take things from people. I think sometimes...
or just bored.
Yeah,
right?
I think radical feminists can get this, understandably, this idea that like men are just so chauvinistic that they're not even satisfied with oppressing women. They actually want to like steal their being from them, and that's transgenderism.
Right.
Is the theft of femininity from women, and the like, you know. And I think again, like these positions tend to come from places where we're not doing examinations of conscience and saying, oh, we're all part of something here. We're all projecting images. Vanity has become efficacious for all of us. So anyways, the point is that when the woman appears, she appears as an object in a way that maleness to the male can never appear. And so she appears as a possible object of consumption, and in that as salvation. Because then everything that's weird and subjective about gender in the woman appears to be solid and whole and understandable. I can even investigate it. It has parts. It wears these clothes. It tends to do this sort of thing. It has this kind of voice. All are things that are objects to me, not what's flowing out of me, not what's just happening whether I would or no, but something out there.
Right.
And,
well, I mean, that's what that's the typical critique of feminists of transgenderism, is that you're just looking at a lot of like exterior stereotypes, and that's how you're deciding that you are a woman. I mean, I don't think that's the only thing that's going on. Like, you have to already have like a disjointed experience within yourself. Like, I don't fit into like my role or my stereotypes. But in the actual like becoming of a woman, it's like I'm taking on these parts and I'm wearing these clothes and I'm participating in these stereotypes, a lot of just exterior things that you can almost like check off a list, which is not the subjective experience of being a woman, because I mean I can reverse it. Like you don't. It's weird to think about like what does it feel like to be a woman. It's like, well, I don't.
Right.
I really don't. Like there's instances where you do feel like a woman, but it's always in relation, which is kind of what we've been getting at. Like identity comes from relationships with other people. Like you feel like a woman in relation to men, but if it's just a bunch of girls hanging out, you're not like experiencing feeling woman.
Yeah, it's not an object. I mean, it's not something apart from who you are. And so I think that all of this is to say, maybe we should sort of attempt to summarize and wrap things up here. All of this is to say that we live in a particular, very particular world, a very strange world that has only really existed as it existed for a relatively small amount of time.
A couple hundred years.
Yeah, and even like with the consumptive society, 50, 60 years, like it is
very, very new.
It is a great novelty that everyone is experiencing to have survival, both of yourself, your economy, and society as a whole, dependent upon your consumptive desire, which itself is dependent upon you feeling like a void that needs to grab things and bring them within yourself. This is a novelty. And so the first thing I think we should do is have mercy on ourselves and on everyone else, because it's not going to be easy to simply look at this thing and come to quick solutions. Like, and I think if there's anything that offends me about the, like, just look down and then you'll know your gender thing, it's not that I don't understand the reasoning behind it. It's that it doesn't account for the entire world. Everything is conspiring to create a people who are navigating life by projecting images of themselves. And what I see in transgenderism is sort of an ambiguous phenomenon. And I don't want to, I mean, everyone has their particular story and their particular reason why they don't fit with what they perceive of as male or female, and why the other sex appears as a sort of salvation, a fittingness, a thing that they are. But I do think that from the perspective of the church, that on the one hand, that sense of peace that comes from the other gender is, well, not even on the one hand. I just think that sense of peace that comes from being the other gender must come from a certain healing of our current circumstances. It's like when you can say that, you have explained to yourself, as it were, the difference between yourself and the image you would project.
And people don't gravitate towards it unless there is something like really effective.
Yeah.
Like there is a piece that comes in finally being able to coordinate your life and the image together. Because I think what we're all looking for is harmony and integrity. So like a healing of that fractured interior experience, and then also a healing of like a fractured experience of community, because now you belong somewhere.
Finally you belong. And again, the reason why I think we should be so merciful and as understanding as possible is because that fractured experience and that loss of community really is something that has been done to people. It really is a very broken world that they're being born into, that we're all born into. So to some degree, we are all seeking the same healing, where we need to make who we are and then the image coordinate. We need to become ourselves.
Right.
And I think that,
like, it's a project that we're all doing.
Yeah.
Because we don't really have a choice. And to look at certain people's experience and saying, like, well, you're doing it all wrong. It's like, no, we're all living in the same world together. And I think that brings a lot of sympathy and kind of understanding, like, everyone's general misery.
Yeah.
And why people would reach for the certain things that they are doing. I there's a book that I really like by Larry Chapp, Confessions of a Catholic Worker, and he talks about this in the introduction, I think. I mean, he's speaking specifically to the church, but I think it's easy to just look at, there's the world and there's the church. There's them and then us, this kind of like binary thinking. It's like, yeah, we're a part of the church, but we are the world. Like, I am a member of the church as someone who lives and is thoroughly modern. Like, I share this same culture, this same need to perform, the same need to project an image, the same like fractured experience of community. I mean, we're all experiencing this like to various degrees in our different circumstances, but it is something that we're all sharing together.
Yeah, and there is a way in which, I don't want this to be taken the wrong way, it's just that in transgenderism, there's a certain taking seriously of the world, an attempt to realize this consumptive world in the body, because it's really undergoing surgery as a literal reality. So it's not, we're not simply saying, how do I put it? When we say things like, okay, in modernity, it becomes a source of power to view yourself as your own masterpiece, to view yourself as your own work of art, to craft yourself through posting, to put yourself out there in a specific controlled form. And all of this is true, and we are all doing it. But there's a certain lack of reality there. Like, we can feel that gap where we know the picture is in us. We know the image is in us. We feel the guilt. Maybe we have just bad dreams or can't really sleep because we're worried that people are going to cut through all that crap that we post and really get to the core of us and find that void that wants to consume because it's not really belonging. It doesn't really have an identity. And it seems to me that within transgenderism, there's an effort to take literally this demand to craft ourselves, this survival mechanism of putting an image of ourselves out there, to say, no, I really will deliberately craft the body into a presentation. I will undergo the surgery. I will become an image of myself. Like, the image will become real. And that is not, I guess all I would say is, while I understand in some ways the great offense that is to the reality of creation and the reality of the body and of the fundamental attitude of the human, which is to receive ourselves as given. I understand that. But I would also say there's a certain honesty to it that... Right.
Like, this is the thing that we're doing, and finally someone says it. Someone does it. Yeah. Someone says, okay, I'm going to make this whole image crafting thing real. If we're going to live like this, let's really live like this. This is what we are. We are people who construct the appearance of ourself, and don't receive it from above, and don't receive it from this network of relationships. Like, we do it. And if we can attain it, there's this hope of healing, a hope of wholeness, of peace. And I don't think there's any need to deny that really does produce, at least for a time, a sort of peace. Because finally this fracture has apparently been wounded or been healed. I mean, I think Augustine kind of explores this notion in false peace. So I mean, that's something that we like definitely experience. Like, if there's someone that you, I don't know, family members that you have like pretty serious political disagreement, like, you come to a false peace where you just don't talk about those things. So it's real. It does smooth over interactions, and it's better than being at each other's throats. But it's not the true peace of really being on the same page. I mean, that kind of peace that you have with friends where you just share and are totally honest and open is different than like we'll just kind of pretend that this isn't an issue, that there isn't integrity or like a wholeness there. It's just a smoothing over. And so I think when we don't receive our bodies as a given, like open to like the adventure and the possibility of like what does this mean in this world that I can't control. Like there is a real false piece of like finally coordinating the image and your life together, even if they can't correspond for forever, even if it fails eventually. There is a real false piece that's there that you really do in fact experience.
Yeah, I think that's right. All right, so I hope all of this whole podcast up to this point has been an effort to look at all of the various lenses by which, it becomes a pretty sensible thing to say, like, yeah, I have a male body, but in fact, I'm a female. And I hope this particular podcast does at least an initial step towards understanding why that might be a response that's sensible within our world, within this particular structure. But the other thing that it should show Catholics who are listening is that the way out is total conversion of everybody. And I wish this were not true. And I think this is what fundamentally is going to ultimately put us at odds with any particular, brand of conservatism, or however you want to look at it. It just seems like what we really want, and what I really want, is to know that it's just the soybeans that are, it's just the estrogens in the water. It's just the boredom of the kids. Give them a job. It's just that, it's just pornography. It's just whatever it is. We want it to be just that.
Mm-hmm. Because then it's fixable.
Then our work is easy. It's like we can go after the thing that did the bad thing. And what's so difficult, and it kind of breaks my heart to have to say it, is that what is missing is the church. The reason we began this whole discussion with the Reformation, it's not just because we're picking a point on the map. It's because when the church is lost as really authoritative and real in the world, you no longer, you inaugurate, it can take hundreds of years, it has, the current conditions that we experience now. Like when we get rid of the belonging of the church, the universal destiny of man for God, the one body of Christ, we get disintegration. We get a world after different ends. And so unfortunately, the truth of the matter is that we have to become holy in ourselves, and we have to build a genuinely Christian society, converting everyone else in order to sort of fix these problems, which is another way of saying, like, there isn't a fix outside of sanctity.
Right.
And I think that's very hard, because I'd much rather, like, it would just go away if you make the right law, kind of thing.
Right. Which that would be easier. And then I also think that the solution, and I find this is true about most correct solutions, is that they're not exciting. They're not edgy.
Yeah.
Yeah, like most of the conclusions I've taken a while to come to, or like, oh wow, what this person is saying is really wise, usually is, I mean, it's not a quick fix. It's something that is kind of boring. And so now those things have become like like the flags for, you're on the right path if the solution is boring.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think that sanctity is boring. Actually, I think it just appears that way on the outside.
Yeah.
Or at least it can sound that way. But yeah, so I guess like maybe for Catholics who are listening, like this is a helpful call to a personal examination of conscience, like something I need to be doing too. Mm-hmm. We can't fix everything all at once about the external world or even ourselves. But we can have that conversation with God, like, okay, what are the things that you've been pointing out to me that I need to go into a deeper conversion about? Yeah, I think that would be really helpful. Because again, going back to the point of like, we're all doing it. Like we're all children of this age.
Yeah.
And it's going to be a slow time pulling ourselves out of it. And it's never really going to be complete because we are children of this age. And so that work really is continual. Conversion is something that is continual. Yeah.
There it is. All right. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. Be assured of our prayers for you. I know that some of these works can be difficult. Not everything is clear in the podcast format. I hope that it is as clear as we can get it. But know that we're praying for you, and I hope you pray for us too. So that's The Culture of Narcissism by Lash and Being Consumed by Bill Kavanaugh. And we hope that when you read these, you'll get as much out of them as we did. All right. Goodbye.